First of all, welcome to our series, our webinar series on managing farm risk. We're excited to have you all here and share this with you. So this is the first part in a 6-part series, and today we're going to talk about human resource risk and how to manage it in your farm. I'm going to start with introductions. We've got 4 people who will be presenting this webinar to you today. We'll start with Kelly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Heckeman, and I'm a Purdue Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources and an Area Director for 9 counties in the northeast corner of Indiana.
Thanks, Kelly. Michael?
Good morning. This is Michael Langemeyer. I am a professor of agriculture economics, specializing in agriculture finance, farm management, and transition planning.
Perfect. Maria?
Hi, I'm Maria Marshall. I'm a professor in the Department of Agriculture Economics as well, and I specialize in family business management and small business development.
Perfect. And my name is Renee Wyatt. I'm a research and extension specialist in the Department of Ag Econ. I work on succession planning, family business, regional development, things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. So all of this webinar series is based upon work that a group of us on campus and throughout the state have been doing based on an NCERME grant that we received. So we're a team of faculty, staff, extension educators, and 1 lawyer thrown in there. And we'll be the ones presenting this webinar series to you. So this webinar series is built to give you a little taste of our course, and we have an online course that's open enrollment. The cost is only $49, and we're focused on the 6 pillars of farm risk management. So it's a deeper dive into each of these 6 topics that we're going to cover in the webinar series. So you can see the bit.ly link if you're interested in registering. We'll have it at the end too, so we'll entice you through this webinar. Just go ahead and sign up. So when you think about human resource risk, you might think of a large department in some company, and they do HR. But really, anytime you have employees, you have human resource risk and human resource issues to deal with. And we all know that farms are labor intensive. There are a lot of people involved in the management of that farm. And so there's a lot of risk involved with that. And so these human resource risks can come from a variety of sources. You can have poor communication or poor people management practices. You can have management error that can cause risk. And then when you think about people, you always have divorce, you can have death, you can have illness or injury to employees or managers or owners or family even. You can have temporary leave. The human resource risk really runs the gamut of people when it comes to farms. And so we're going to dive into how you can manage that in your operation.
Okay, thank you, Renee. To help get you to think about what possibly could happen on a farm operation or in a business operation about that human resource risk, we don't always do a great job of stopping to plan ahead and think about things that could happen. And unfortunately, we usually wait until they do happen. And then it's very hard to make really good decisions when we're emotionally not prepared for what's coming at us. So we're going to share some scenarios to help get you to think about different things that are possible that can happen in a farm or business operation. Okay, so scenario 1. So Joe and Jennifer, they have a medium-sized business focusing on irrigation. It's a multi-generation family business. They joined with Jennifer's parents. Joe handles contracting and construction, and Jennifer takes care of all the paperwork. So after 10 years of marriage, they are getting a divorce, and Joe wants out of the business to move to Montana. So this could be extremely devastating to the business, depending on how you prepared for this. If there was no preparation for the potential of a divorce or a buy-sell agreement, how do I help people exit the business? Potentially could end the business. So this is one great example that could happen and is it's got a high probability that it can happen in a business. Okay, let's go to the next scenario. So Kathy and her husband Bob, her father-in-law Stan, and her nephew operate a 200-cow dairy and have 2,000 acres of corn and beans. And Bob and Rich are great supporters in our country, and they're in their reserves, and they're called to duty in Iraq. And then 2 months later, Stan had a stroke. Kathy is the only employee left. I can't even imagine what Kathy is going through if she has all of this and there was no plan made beforehand. And in these scenarios, we're really helping you get to think about what are some of the potential realities. Obviously, we're not going to provide you solutions right here on what these farm families could have done. We're going to give you some ideas moving forward, but just to help getting you to think what happens if all three of your key employees are no longer in the operation. Are you prepared? Does Kathy have the skill set? Can she pivot to cover all the necessary day-to-day operation to keep this farm going in the right direction and keep it afloat until Bob and Rich are able to return and Stan is able to recover? Can she handle that? And was there a plan thought out beforehand? If there's not a plan thought out beforehand, Kathy's going to probably struggle quite a bit to figure out how to pivot to get through all of these situations and continue to keep the dairy and the crop operation moving forward. Okay, let's go to the next scenario. So we're going to go to a great time of year thinking about the fruit market that the Johnsons own, and they have 200 acres of melons, 300 acres of apple and peach orchards, berry patches. Sarah has run the store for them for 10 years. She is very friendly and knows all the regular customers by name. And we know how important that is to a direct marketing business. Customers really appreciate that personal kind of service and contact, and they value that relationship with Sarah. But Sarah has taken a vacation to Hong Kong. She's visiting her boyfriend, and he has asked her to stay. So while this one doesn't seem quite as traumatic as Kathy in our last example, it still could have a huge impact on the Johnson's business. Because Sarah's knowledge of the customers and that relationship is a key reason, part of the success of that business, and having the ability to be successful relationship building in the community. And do we have a plan? What was our plan if Sarah ever left to replace her? I think the challenge for all of us is to realize at some point, whether we're the owners, whether we're employees, we're all replaceable. And at some time, we're no longer going to be a part of that business. And what does that look like when we're not, whether it's a decision to permanently no longer be a part of that business, or whether it's a voluntary retirement, or another short-term absence. So we'll go to one more scenario to help continue to get you to think about things that could go wrong. The Brown family has had a roadside store for generations. The daughter of the owners, Mary, expands the business by setting up an online store. It, of course, is very successful. It takes off quickly, but the online and in-person stores don't have a system to connect and track inventory. So due to the high volume of online sales, the business is short on inventory, and there are customers who do not get their orders fulfilled. So this scenario is maybe a little bit different. We don't necessarily have a key employee or family member who has exited the business, but because of success in what we did, have we grown and built the business, we've created another challenge in the business where did we plan ahead? Did we think about what options would be available to us? And could this potentially be a scenario that we would have to address? So taking time to really think about the what ifs are going to be extremely successful in helping businesses to continue and to meet challenges and unexpected risk and things that come up, but we're better prepared for and have some idea of how to address. So next slide, I think we're gonna, okay. So I think we've kind of given you, I hope, some great inspiration of different things that can happen, not necessarily go wrong. Some of those are positive, some are unexpected, but how do you approach those? How do you plan for those? And what do you have in place to help you get through those situations? Planning ahead is so extremely vital to work through these scenarios and help to reduce the risk that your business could potentially face. So we're going to continue and give you some tips on how to focus on those right priorities, keep the business functioning, whether illness, a divorce, absence of that key person, and then help to make sure that employees have a better opportunity to also plan their own lives. There's many key employees that we have that we want to keep as part of the business as long as we can, and having them having knowledge of the direction and the future growth of that business will help ensure that they want to remain a part of our team in our business. So I'm going to turn it over to Maria to help set the stage for how do we do that contingency planning and get ready for these what if scenarios.
Okay, so I think I'm actually taking the next section, Kelly. I'm gonna block Maria until the next section. So in all of these scenarios, a contingency plan could have helped, right? In all of the scenarios that Kelly went through that she discussed, you have an absence of an employee, somebody's sick, someone's not available, or maybe your market is booming. But do you have a contingency plan for that, and how do we do that? And so you might say, what is a contingency plan? So it's a set of procedures that really defines how a business can continue or recover its critical functions if there's any sort of disruption to normal activity. So if we even think back to the past 2 years, COVID probably affected your business in some way, caused some kind of disruption. Maybe it wasn't a complete disaster to your business, but it probably changed how you interact with customers, with how you market your product, how you deliver your product. There was probably some sort of disruption, and having a contingency plan in place can help with that. So there's not really another process that you have that does a better job of making the business assess its operation and also its processes to see how you can continue or recover that business in the wake of a disruption. So a contingency plan is a structured exercise of planning, makes you think ahead of what to do when key operations aren't available. You can have a contingency plan for maybe you lose power and you need power to power your seed house or something like that. Maybe you have some sort of backup generator. There's different things that you can do to recover those critical functions if there is a disruption to get you back to normal activities. So we're going to go through a little bit more about that. So when you write a contingency plan, there's 5 steps. So you start with risk assessment. So you say, what is vulnerable in my business? What do we think could happen? What is going on in our business that makes it risky? The second part of that is the business impact analysis. So you say, okay, what are the chances and what are the magnitude of that event happening? So a car accident, for example, the chances of a car accident are pretty low. But if you think about, the result of that or the magnitude of that, if that did happen, that can have a large impact on your business. And so when you weigh those out, you can say, okay, so we don't think it's very likely, but if it was, it could be catastrophic to our business. So what can we do to mitigate that risk, transfer that risk, reduce that risk? What business risk management strategies can we implement to help our business get through something like that? So the third part of the contingency plan is risk management strategies and tools. So that's where you take that business impact analysis and say, okay, what strategies and tools are we going to implement in our business to help us in case something does happen? In the fourth step, you think about your risk management goals. So what kind of risk tolerance does your business have? What are you willing to deal with in your business in terms of risk? And then lastly, of course, you document the plan and disseminate that to employees, make sure everybody's trained and things like that. We're not going to dive deep into the contingency plan today, but we have a couple great resources that you can use. So that EC 736, planning for the unexpected, That goes through all the steps of a contingency plan, how to do that, how to document it. And that is free. It's through Purdue Extension. It's a Purdue Extension publication. It's on the Purdue Institute for Family Business website, along with Code Red. So Code Red is a great tool to use as well. And that's a tool where you can inventory everything on your farm as far as your digital footprint. So how you get into email, who you contact in case of an insurance event, where the shop keys are, things like that. So Code Red is a really good tool to help you start inventorying your business, and that's a part of your contingency plan. So when we think about risk management strategies, there's 4 main strategies that we can implement. So the first is risk avoidance. So that's where your business takes actions to evade risky situations. So for example, let's think about driving. So there's icy roads. So if you're going to avoid that risk, you're probably going to stay off the road. You're probably not going to drive it all that day. You're going to virtually go to your meeting instead of go in person. Okay. If we think about risk reduction, that's where you try to build in safety to a situation. So you know there's risk in that situation, but you're going to try to reduce that risk by doing something safety wise. So if you're driving and it's icy, maybe you slow down. You make sure you take it slow, you give yourself extra time. You're reducing the risk of an accident by slowing down and taking those precautions. So there's risk anticipation, and that's where we maybe retain the risk. And so that promotes self-insurance. So if we think about driving again, maybe you make sure you put on your seatbelt, give yourself extra time, things like that. And then we have risk transfer. And so this is where the probability and the impact of a situation are pretty large if it does happen. And so we transfer that risk to someone else. So a lot of times in business, we're going to use insurance to cover those types of risks that you can't self-insure. If we think about icy roads, if you're going to transfer that risk, maybe you say, okay, my spouse is going to drive and not me today. That's a way we could transfer that risk. But those are the 4 main strategies that we're going to utilize for risk management. And so when we think about tools for risk management, there's some steps that we can take to help us to recover those critical functions if something does happen in a business. And the first thing would be to document procedures for handling an incident. So who performs what critical business functions? So if something happens, who does what? We need to have some sort of a plan. You need to have a checklist for employees that details the procedures for each critical business function. So if somebody is absent from the business, you know what they did and how they did it. And somebody with similar training can step in and take that over. So something that you can have in place that can help that would be a detailed job description. I know that a lot of farmers, when we talk to them, they kind of roll their eyes when they say, oh, job descriptions, we don't need that. We're 5 people. We know what each other does. And you know, when you really interview those farmers and you get into it and you ask each person in the business, they don't necessarily know exactly what everybody does. You know, if one of them says, you know, we have to get the combine ready for spring, that's good. That's a good start. But what does that mean? What do you actually do to that combine? What kind of maintenance do you do? What calibrations need to be done? Things like that. So when we say detailed job descriptions, we really mean detailed. You know, who goes and talks to the co-op? Who makes sure that your farm loan is secured? Who does all of these things? So having a detailed job description for each person in the business can be crucial if somebody gets hurt or is ill, or exits the business temporarily or permanently for whatever reason. Another thing that you can do is to cross-train employees. So that's having multiple people trained for the same thing. Maybe they're not an expert in it, but they at least know how another person in the business does their job, and they could probably get by, maybe with some help, but they could get by doing that other person's job. Another thing that you can do is to detail the procedures for handling financial issues. So we've had farms where their bookkeeper or the person who ran the finances, has an injury or has a stroke, they're unavailable, and no one else knows where things are, where the records are, where the up-to-date financial records are. So it's really crucial that you have accessible and up-to-date financial records, so that your family and employees can keep running that business if somebody in that key position is unavailable. So next, we're going to hand it over to Maria.
So now we're just going to dig a little bit deeper on some of these policies, job descriptions, and employee handbooks that you want to have, whether it's just a family farm and it's just family members that are working, or you have some labor in hands, or more permanent employees. And a lot of times when I talk about policies, I'm like, oh, more people, more problems, so more policies. And so you want to have policies before problems. So some examples of some policies and processes that you want to have in place are properly trained employees. So properly training employees to do what you know that they need to do the right way, right? Just to make sure that you're safe, you're taking these safety precautions. Job descriptions, like Renee had described earlier, cross-training employees. So you have to have job descriptions to know who needs to be cross-trained to do what jobs. So in some of those scenarios, we know that one key person can leave. Well, does anybody know how this other person keeps the records? Does anybody know that other person really does? What are the things that must be done, and what are the things that don't have to be done day to day or can be left for another time? And of course, contingency plans, where you're trying to minimize the cost of an incident. You're allowing the farm to kind of resume the operations more quickly and efficiently. And that's what a contingency plan is really about. And what these processes really are trying to do is helping, if something happens, it's helping you to get back to where you were, to kind of recover efficiently and quickly. Right. So in the time of crisis is not the time to start to think about, oh, what needs to be done, but to actually move forward. So so that's why we're talking about processes in contingency planning, and then discuss these goals with all the generations. That's also part of these processes and planning and policies. And some of that might be, our goal is to keep this a family farm, and thus before anybody becomes an owner of the family farm, they have to have a prenuptial agreement, no matter what. That's just a policy that we have to make sure that our business assets are kept intact, right? So it's not about the person or the marriage or anything like that. It's just a policy that's in place to protect the assets of the family. And that's a contingency plan. That's trying to plan ahead for a divorce, right? Like one of the scenarios. And then planning for management transfer, right? That's also a policy and a plan and a process that has to be thought out. So does everybody get to be part of the farm? Do they have to be a contributor? Do they have to buy in? All of these are these policies that we might not think about them as human resource risks or human resource problems, but they are part of the human resources that you have to think about when you're thinking about a family farm and a family business. So, okay, so job descriptions. Really, you want to clarify duties and responsibilities. And yes, Renee said you want to make them detailed, but you don't want to make them so detailed that it's like the minutia of everything, right? Because it depends on what you're going to use the job description for. We have usually sometimes job descriptions to get a new employee, right? When we're going to hire somebody, we have a job description. This is what we want them to do. These are the gaps in our farm that we need to cover, and that's what we want them to do. And so we write a job description for that. And then it's clarifying all the duties that go with the job. So, my job as a professor, and there's a myriad of things that I need to do. They were not all in my job description, right? It just said research and extension, but then there's a whole bunch of duties that go around there. So you want to have a job description, and you want to know, what are you going to use the job description for? Is it to hire an employee? And then are you going to have a job description that clarifies all the duties that somebody needs to do when you're training them on the job, right? Those might look slightly different, and they might have different details in them. Provide performance standards, right? That's what job description does. It says, well, you need to do this to move forward. Everybody wants to think that their job leads to either a promotion or they're going to get a raise. If the raises are merit raises, right? You need to clarify there's a merit raise. So what do they need? What does somebody need to do to meet that merit, to get that merit raise? Those are some of the things that would be in a job description or that need to be detailed. It improves communication. It improves the communication to say, hey, you're not doing this that you were supposed to be doing. This is part of your job description. And obviously, it sells jobs to applicants if you have a great job description. It improves your training programs because you know what anybody needs to be trained on. It motivates employees, right? Because they know what they need to do. They know what they need to do to get a raise, get promoted, any of those things. reduces the chances of litigation as well, which is a risk, right? So this is a way to reduce that risk. And it also helps in litigation, right? To have a job description, because if you are going to litigate, well, you say, well, this is the job description. This is what this person was supposed to do. They were failing on their job. They've got 1, 2, and 3 times that we've told them, in writing that they're not fulfilling their job, and that's why we let them go. Next slide. Okay. All right, so tips for writing effective job descriptions. If you don't have job descriptions now, you might want to involve the employees that are doing the job to write their own job descriptions. That's a great way to know what everybody's doing. And sometimes people are amazed a lot of times when they're like, well, write a job description and realize, oh, I didn't know you were doing all of those things. We tend to think that everybody knows what everybody's doing, but a lot of times we don't know what everybody's doing all of the time. Commit time in the short run to save time in the long run, right? So get the employees to, if you have them already and don't have job descriptions, to write their job descriptions. Commit to having job descriptions in the future and to keep revising them and making sure that they're actually up to date. It's going to save you time in the long run because of all of the things we just talked about previously. Borrow ideas from others. If you know that others have similar jobs in the job descriptions or jobs and they already have job descriptions, borrow ideas from them. There's a lot of ideas on the internet as well. Write the duties first, right? And then write about other things that you might want them to do. And don't confuse a duty with how to accomplish something. Right. So in the details, you're going to say, well, this is what you need to be doing. You don't want to actually write, and this is how you need to do it. Right. So make sure that that's not in there. And limit duties to 8 or fewer and sub duties to 4 or fewer. You don't want to make it so long that somebody looks at it and says, well, I have no idea. Well, this is a lot. Right. So you want to make sure that you've got broader buckets and then subcategories if they need to be longer. And obviously include an elastic clause like assist with other duties for the good of coworkers in the business or something like that, or other duties. A lot of times we'll see like other duties as assigned, right? Because you can't think of everything as your business evolves. You won't think of every single thing that everybody has to do. And sometimes we all have to pitch in to do different things. Begin each duty with an action verb, right? So cleaning this, creating this, any number of things, right? Driving this might be one. Take advantage of vacancies to create new job descriptions, right? So a lot of times what we do is, oh, this person is leaving. And we tend to say, oh, we want somebody who's exactly like them. But a good time is to say, okay, this is what this person was doing. What needs to evolve or what needs to change now as we move forward? Right? So think about that and don't just say, well, we just need to replace this person to do exactly the same thing. What are some things that might need to change as you're writing a new job description? And of course, keep job descriptions current and accurate. So don't have the same job description from 20 years ago. Look at how, make sure that it is up to date. Because remember, a job description also is supposed to motivate employees to do a good job and do everything that they're supposed to do. And so if you don't keep those current, they might be doing a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know. And then they're like, well, you're not really looking at all the other stuff that I'm doing here just because it's not in my job description, even though my job has evolved. So you want to make sure you keep those current and accurate. So employees' policies. I'm a big believer in having policies and thinking these things through and to have them before they actually apply to anybody in particular. And this is where kind of thinking about things in the future about what could happen is really important. And that's why this is part of contingency planning. Because if you're writing a policy when it's actually really needed, right? You're in that crisis mode or something's changing, then it's like you're writing that policy about that person or that particular incident. And so then it becomes very personal, right? So if you've told me all my life that, everybody who is an owner of our family business needs to have a prenuptial agreement, and that's always what I've known. As soon as I started dating, I told the person that I was dating, that's just part of our policy, or that, no in-laws can be part of the family business because that's a policy. There are family business that have that. Then it's not about me and it's not about who I'm dating. It's not about who I'm marrying. It's just a policy that the family has always had. right? But if you're telling me, and now I've told you, well, I'm dating this person, and you're saying, well, they can't be part of the business, or you can't, you're going to have to now ask them for a prenuptial agreement, then it's about me, and it's about the person I'm marrying, right? So that's what policies before problems means, that you're really thinking about what's going to happen, what could happen, how do we mitigate if a divorce does happen? What are some things that we can put in place? So think about rules that provide these guidelines for this proper conduct of employees in the business, right? That's part of these employee policies. What are some things that you want your employees to do? What's the proper conduct? What makes sense for your farm, right? Like time to report to work in the morning, right? Is there a specific time that everybody needs to be there, right? So for example, I have people that work remote in the center that I run. And so we have kind of a standard time that, people might be coming and going, but a standard working time where anybody should be able to get a hold of you might be from 9 to 3, right? Because people might be going in, leaving out, but you've got like a standard time, right? Or it's a standard number of hours that people have to work, and it might be from 5 to 6 and any time in between that. How flexible or not is the work environment that you want to have, right? What's the time? Everybody has the same starting to work, and how does that work? What amount of vacation time you would have? That would be an employee policy. Do you have vacation? Do you have any benefits? Do you have sick leave? All of those are employee policies. The day that paychecks are issued, that's a policy, right? And a lot of times they're just implied, or they're verbally told, but there's no kind of written statement of this is when we start. These are the vacation days that people have, or this is when you cannot take vacation. So there are businesses where there's a time that nobody's allowed to take vacation, period. Right? Because it might be a very high season. So you might have accountants, for example, that in June or July can never take vacation because it's end of fiscal year. You can take any vacation as long as you want any other time, but not that time. Does that apply to your farm? Because it's your very busy season. So think about those things and then put them on paper so that you have them, and it's not kind of like, oh, well, I told you this, and it's not written anywhere. And then, thanks, Renee. No, go ahead. So again, policies before problems. So establishing these policies really brings attention to the issues before they become personal, emotional, like I had said before. So you really want to make sure they're not about a particular person or a particular crisis. Now, you might have a crisis, you deal with it, and then you say, okay, we don't want this to happen again. What are the policies we need to be put in place, right? There is a learning process about the things that you're going to need, and that's going to happen. But you want to make sure that you are thinking ahead and think about your business in that kind of critical, what's the impact, and what do we need to do those things. You want to make sure you're managing expectations and you're preparing family members for how things will work. Again, you want to make sure that your requirements for joining or moving up in the business are clarified, right? Does anybody get to join? Does anybody that's blood related get to join the business, the family farm, right? Or does there have to be a buy-in, or does there have to be a contribution, right? So what are those expectations that you're setting, not only for family, but employees that are part of that farm, right? That's all what policies are there for, is managing expectations. And of course, this policy on compensation and performance appraisal issues, right? A lot of times, if you don't have a job description, you don't then have anything on like, how is somebody compensated? And what do they need to do to actually get a raise? Right? It's kind of verbal, there's nothing written. So it's really about getting some of these things written on paper and thinking through, oh, this is what you would need to do to be able to get a merit raise or to get a bonus. What are those things? If you don't get merit raises, this is your paycheck, but to get a bonus, this is what needs to happen in our business, or this is what needs to be done. So a lot of these policies would be written in an employee handbook, and it doesn't have to be 50 pages of an employee handbook. You can just say, okay, for our business, we just need these 5 policies. These are the 5 things, at least, that right now we can agree on that we need to have. But it does really contain answers to these frequently asked questions like, when can I take vacation? Do I get vacation? When do I need to report to work? Is there a dress code? Right? Depending on what you're doing on your farm, there might be a dress code that you want everybody to be able to have these things on when they're for their own safety in your farm. And that would be in the employee handbook. right? And of course, you don't want this to be interpreted as an employee contract. And you should have these, disclaimers, but it is a good place to say, well, this is all written in the handbook, and here's a handbook of all the kind of like the standard policies that we have in our farm to move us forward for your safety and ours. Okay, so the employee handbook and policies, you want to put things in, you want these policies to be in writing, right? These practices, standards. We talked about anything from a dress code to when somebody goes on vacation or can go on vacations, the start times, depending on if those need to be policies. Include only significant policies and procedures. So you don't want everything on there, right? So unless you're going to have like a 100-page policy book that then nobody's going to read. So think about what are the most significant things that are important to your business that you want your employees to read. We've all worked in maybe smaller, bigger corporations, usually bigger corporations that do have an HR department and do have a handbook. And I'm not sure that all of us read that handbook from start to finish. But when I have a question, I do go to the handbook to see, oh, what's the policy of the university for me to do this or not to do that, right? So focus on issues that are most relevant to you as an employer. What is important to you that you want to make sure your employees always know that these are the policies and standards that you're going to have in your farm? It's about communicating mutual expectations about, again, time off entitlements, performance, behavior expectations that are going to help you reduce liability. Avoid including information subject to frequent change, right? So you don't want something that's always constantly changing in your handbook. Right? So you want to make sure you're also reviewing your policies and keeping them up to date, just like you would for your job descriptions. You want to make sure that any policies you would have in your handbook that are written are accurate and up to date. And of course, in your handbook, don't include confidential information that's part of your business in terms of your policies. And now I believe Michael Langemeyer is going to talk about management transfer as part of human resource risk.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Let's go to the first slide here. Transferring business management between generations is a very critical step. And here we're talking about transferring some management duties from an older generation to a younger generation. And this could involve multiple individuals that are part of the older generation and multiple individuals that are part of the younger generation. So this is not just two people, this could be multiple people. But the idea here is to give the people that are coming back to the farm some responsibilities fairly quickly so they can begin to manage certain aspects of the business. This obviously is a very important topic, but in many cases, we talk about things like compensation and asset transfer without really thinking about transferring business management. And this can be a real sore spot for the younger generation if we don't think about this early on. Why is this important? First of all, small businesses are becoming much more complex. There's also a specialization of management tasks. It's very common on larger farms today where we have someone that's like a CFO. That's in charge of the financial management, is in charge of the accounting, in charge of the records. We might have another person that's in charge of marketing. And so we need to train those people so they can take on these responsibilities. And there's a very fine line here between giving too little management responsibility to the younger generation and giving too much so that they're overwhelmed. And so this is not necessarily an easy topic or an easy thing to do. That's why we have to give this some thought. This is also related to something that Maria briefly talked about, the importance of cross-training. If we have somebody that's involved in financial management that's part of the older generation, at some point we need to think about slowly but surely transferring that responsibility over to the younger generation so we don't skip a beat if a person that's part of the older generation retires. So let's move on to the next slide. For a multiple generation business to be successful, the parties need to agree on the future direction of the business. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a strategy here and goals and objectives. And really what we're talking about here, do both parties, both the older generation, the younger generation, have a common vision for what this business is going to look like 5 years from now and 10 years from now? One of the ways to come up with this common vision is to explore goals and objectives of the relevant parties. Goals are broad-based and general statements of what an individual or business wants to achieve. Objectives are precise and quantifiable measures related to how you achieve these goals. And so we don't necessarily have to have these all written down, but they should be discussed. It should be clearly discussed where each party thinks this business is going to be 5 years from now and 10 years from now. That's all part of thinking about this management transfer and slowly but surely transferring more management responsibility to the individuals that are coming back to the farm. In addition to having a very large impact on management transfer, goals and objectives impact how business income should be divided between parties. Should we move fairly quickly from being a compensated employee for the younger generation to being a partner? That all depends on the goals and objectives. It all depends on, for example, is that younger generation going to be full-time from day one, or are they slowly going to enter into that full-time status into the business? Maybe 5 years from now, they're going to be a partner in that case, rather than from day one or the first year. And so that's why it's important to think about this. It's not only compensation that we need to think about; it's this management transfer, giving some management responsibilities to the younger generation. So why is this important to discuss goals and objectives? One of the reasons is we have a family business. And so we're dealing with both family and business. So let's just contrast a few things between the family and the farm business. Families many times are inward looking. Farm is outward looking. They're more strategic in their orientation. They're thinking about what this farm might look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Many times family avoids risk, avoids conflict. At times the farm business has to embrace risk. Many times you're going to look at new enterprises or expansion. That's risky, and that might cause conflict, but it's certainly going to cause a volatility to the farm income, and so that it's quite different from a risk standpoint when we're contrasting a family and farm business. Family focuses on emotions. These are very important for families. Farm focuses on work, the tasks that need to be done, and there could be conflicts between these. The family and the farm when we're talking about work tasks. Families seek stability, farms seek change. Many times farms have to change quite a bit over time to remain a viable entity, to remain a viable farm. Family does not count cost necessarily. Farm has to track costs. It has to think about the net returns. It has to think about profitability, and so this is just more reasons why we need to discuss these goals and objectives when a new person is coming back to the farm, to make sure we're on the same page with respect to goals and objectives. One more thing that's quite different between the younger generation and the older generation is related to finance. Many times the older generation would like to pay down debt. They have a goal perhaps of reducing their debt, so at retirement, they don't have very much debt. That's in direct conflict to farm growth. The younger generation is saying, now, wait a minute here. We're going to need to borrow money in order to buy that 160 acres that's right next to us, or to rent that additional 160 acres that's right next to us. And so that's just one example of things that have to be discussed. Yes, there might be it might be important to pay down certain loans, but it's also important to use leverage to expand the farm. And so that's this one example of things that need to be discussed when we're talking about goals and objectives and strategy. Even before the younger generation returns to the farm, it is imperative that both the younger and the older generation think about what skills the younger generation is bringing to the operation. And I've talked to many families that do this. And so, for example, let's say it's just one family is in the older generation, a mom and a dad, and there's a son coming back, and maybe he's going to get married right away, but he's bringing a family back to the business. So we're going to have two families in that business. What is that young person bringing to the farm? Maybe dad is really good mechanic. He's really good at the production side, but he really needs some help with marketing, or he really needs some help with finance, or he really needs some help evaluating this new technology. That's what I'm talking about. Is there some things that the younger generation can do that's really going to help that farm think through some of these very important individuals. And I see myself doing this when I hire people, or I'm on committees to hire people. We often think about hiring people that are like us. That's not what we need. We don't necessarily need two people that are great agronomists. We need one person at least that's a good agronomist, one person that's perhaps good working with animals, but we also need that person that's good at marketing, that's good at finance, that's good at evaluating new technology. And so there's just a lot of skills that a farm needs. And so we want to make sure that younger generation is adding something to that business in terms of skills that are needed on that business. In a small business, hiring someone that is like you, or bringing in a family member that has a similar skill set, is very problematic, particularly as these farms get larger and more complex. There's just a lot of different hats that need to be worn on that farm, and we need people with different skill sets on that farm. So some key management skill questions, just to kind of summarize this particular section, that are very important to think about. What experience does the new person have? Is there some skills that we really need that new person to bring back to the farm? If they don't have those on day one, is it possible for them to obtain those skills? Maybe they can take a marketing class. Maybe they can take a class like we're talking about here related to risk. Is there ways for them to obtain these skills that are very important for the farm? How are you going to teach them what they need to know? And so don't wait until someone gets really sick and then transfer the management skill. Try to slowly but surely discuss different management skills with the younger generation so that they can get up to speed slowly but surely. And so that's cross training is very important. And I'll go back to the example. Let's say the older generation is really good at the production side of the business. Make sure that the skills that you have are being discussed with the younger generation so they can get up to speed and gain the knowledge that you have. One of the things that's really difficult for the older generation sometimes is your job is going to change. How will this new person coming back and taking on some management responsibilities, how is that going to change my job as part of the older generation and other jobs in the business? Maybe we have some employees that have done certain things in the past, and now we want this younger generation to come in and do some of the things that employee was doing. And so this might completely change some job descriptions, like Maria was talking about. And so this needs to be discussed when this younger person is joining the operation. It's very important to have expectations of that new person. What are they going to be responsible for? Is it a particular enterprise? Is it a certain management skill like marketing? I would encourage you to think about having them responsible for something fairly early in the process. Don't wait too long for them to gain some management experience, because that's going to be so important to managing the business down the road. And so defining what they're responsible for in year one, thinking about how they're going to increase their management responsibility in year 3, year 5, and so on. So kind of have a timeline indicating when certain management tasks are going to be turned over to the younger generation, and then thinking about authority. How are joint decisions made? Really clearly thinking about that. And the good example of that is capital purchases. Who is involved when we're thinking about buying land? Who's involved and what's their role when we're thinking about buying a new tractor? That's also very important. Even if the older generation is responsible for those major asset purchases early in the process, the younger generation should at least be part of the discussion. So hopefully I've whet your appetite on this topic. We have more resources available on the Center for Commercial Agriculture website, as well as the EC 716 publication that Renee referred to earlier. So with that, I'll turn it back to Renee.
Well, thanks, Michael. So I hope that as we went through these different aspects of human resource risk, we really motivated you to think about starting to contingency plan and write those job descriptions and have plans in place and think about cross-training and all of those things. But we compiled a checklist for you. So after all of that information, what are a few things that you can start on today that you can really implement in your farm business? So the first one is to draft that contingency plan. Make sure you have the correct documentation. Make sure you disseminate that to farm business owners, to employees, to family members. Make sure everyone's on the same page about that plan and what to do in the case of some kind of a disruption so you can get your business recovered back to critical functioning the way you want it to be. The second is to write and document those job descriptions for all of the positions and employees in the farming operation. We talked about this cross training as well. Having those job descriptions allows people to move up through the business, to have promotions, to have expectations on compensation, helps them to set their goals, helps them to know where their career is going. So those are crucial to your farming operation. Maria talked about policies for employees, including having an employee handbook, having expectations for those employees, having them know what to expect from you, as well as having them know what you expect from them. It goes both ways. So those policies to have for employees are also critical. And then plans for transferring management. So Michael did a great job covering this, including all generations and discussions and evaluating the current management skills and needs. So seeing what your strengths and weaknesses are and trying to fill that through the next generation and training them up in that way. So thank you so much for joining us for our first webinar on our Managing Farm Risk webinar series. And just to remind you again, we do have a course that is open right now that you can enroll in. You can see the registration link there on the screen. But at this time, we've got a few minutes left, so we can go ahead and take any questions that anyone has. I'm going to stop sharing so we can open it up for questions. Feel free to, if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and you can just shout it out since we don't have a huge amount of people on the call. I think we're okay to do that today. Yes, the recording will be available probably within a week. It should be available. We should have it posted to the Purdue Institute for Family Business YouTube page. We had a question in chat. Do you have any other questions? Will we have access to the printed checklist? We can create a PDF of that checklist and we can add that as a link in the video. Yes, we can. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. If not, thank you everybody so much for joining us. We hope that you come back next week. We're going to be talking about legal risks next week with Kyle Mandeville. He's going to go through all of those and allow you to ask questions as well. So thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we hope to see you next Wednesday for our next session.